Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Kris. I don't think I'm gonna be doing any more shots, but I have my now semi-thawed bottle of wild turkey just in case. I might do one. Who am I kidding? Alright, so this is part two. I went back a little bit. Poland had just talked to a gentleman about being attacked by the Klan. So this is part two of Did the Confederacy Have Better Generals? Checkmate the Lincolnites! Okay.
Yes, sir.
Flowers went on to describe how the Klan was using intimidation and violence to keep black men from voting, along with many other acts of domestic terrorism that Nathan Bedford Forrest not only aided and abetted, but more than likely orchestrated.
Oh, you are dastardly Billy Yankin besmirching General Forrest, so you know as well as I that in 1875 he gave a speech to a black civics organization in Memphis in which he said,
We have but one.
I didn't do anything. Oh.
The fact that I'm smoking legal cannabis and it got delivered right to my front door puts me in an excellent mood. This stuff is getting me so...
Sure it does.
Have but one flag, one country. Let us stand together. We may differ in color, but not in sentiment. Many things have been said about me which are wrong, and which white and black persons here who stood by me through the war can contradict. Go to work, be industrious, live honestly, and act truly. And when you are oppressed, I'll come to your relief.
The speech went over stupendously, and as the crowd erupted in acclamation, one African-American woman gave the old general a bouquet of roses and a peck on the cheek.
Yeah, he said that toward the end of Reconstruction, after the Klan's goal of reestablishing the antebellum social order had been accomplished. Southern Democrats were back in power at that point, and Forrest could afford to be magnanimous. I think his message here, though presented in a very nice and friendly way, was work hard, stay in your lane, and we won't have a problem.
I'll say this, just to be devil's advocate. Maybe he did have a change of heart. I don't know when the year was, but maybe he did have a change of heart. Maybe he did think that, hey, look, you work hard, and let's get the South turned around, and let's get it back up on its feet. And maybe he meant that. Not saying he didn't. My personal belief is no. What the hell do I know?
Now, I'll grant you this, man. It is also entirely possible that Forrest did have a genuine change of heart. I'm not discounting that. A lot of people at the time...
I've never seen this, by the way. I did not know that's where he was going.
Thought so. In fact, when a lot of Forrest's former comrades in gray heard about this speech, they shit a brick. One Confederate veterans group went so far as to publish this in their...
By the way, from my understanding, if you ever catch the numbers here at the bottom, there was just a 10. That is his sources. That's the word.
local paper.
We endorse no action unworthy of a Southern gentleman. I speak of the address delivered before a black and tan audience by General Nathan Bedford Forrest. With what a glow of enthusiasm and thrill of pride have I not perused the campaigns of General Forrest's cavalry, their heroic deeds, their sufferings, and their successes under the leadership of one whom I always considered, in my poor judgment, second only to our immortal Hampton. And now, to mar all the luster attached to his name, his brain is turned by the civilities of a mulatto wench who presented him with a bouquet of roses. What can his object be? Ah, General Forrest.
Well, Billy, I won't lie to you. That's really quite vile. Can we go back to talking about military history now? I found it to be much more comfortable and safe.
One more point. Listen, Forrest is unbelievably overhyped, but he was a competent general. He was also a mass-murdering terrorist piece of shit and should be remembered as such.
Yeah.
In my opinion, just about every positive mention of his generalship should be accompanied by extreme moral condemnation and acknowledgement of the U.S. colored troops he massacred without quarter at Fort Pillow.
But can't we celebrate his military achievements without glorifying his less savory attributes?
Yeah, and we could also celebrate Osama bin Laden's dexterous use of Expedia.com, but that'd be pretty fucking weird, wouldn't it? You know what I think? I think you're compensating for something. Y'all didn't have a daring, brilliant cavalry commander on your side during the war, so you're just trying to knock one of ours down a peg. I'll see you, Nathan Bedford Forrest, and raise you Colonel Benjamin H. Grierson, who led a ridiculously clever cavalry raid down the length of Mississippi during the Vicksburg campaign. Though the initial purpose of the raid was to cut the railroad east of Jackson, Mississippi, Grierson went above and beyond the call of duty, going from LaGrange, Tennessee to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, wreaking havoc all the while. Grierson and his troopers broke up 2 other railroads, destroyed weapons and commissary stores, burned storehouses, disabled trains, and freed slaves. All in all, they inflicted millions of dollars worth of property damage on Mississippi and permanently crippled that state's military usefulness for the rest of the war. They also diverted substantial numbers of Confederate cavalry that were badly needed in the defense of Vicksburg itself. But possibly most impressive of all, Grierson accomplished all of this at the cost of 3 men killed and 7 wounded. Contrast that with Forrest's raids. Sure, they were flashy and daring, but did they make a huge difference to the outcome of those campaigns? I wouldn't say so. And to my mind, I think you guys only had one strategically minded general who thought of things in terms of the big picture rather than individual maneuvers and battles. And he was, of course, Joseph E. Johnston.
Wait, who?
Joseph E. Johnston. I think he was the only senior Confederate general who understood that when you're fighting with limited manpower, you need to pick your battles, literally, very, very carefully. Most other rebel generals thought of war in terms of attacking or defending dots on a map. They were very geographic in the way they went about it. But Johnston understood that when you're outnumbered and outgunned, stubbornly holding on to bits of dirt can often be counterproductive. Maneuver, even strategic retreat, can be much more beneficial in the long run.
There is no way to fight with honor.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know enough about Joseph E. Johnston to comment. Sorry. But he sounds like a level-headed general that I think would work in any Confederate or Union. You know?
That's what Jeff Davis often said, which is exactly why Johnston hated him so much and privately talked all sorts of shit about Jackson and Lee. Whereas, it must be said, our side was full of keenly strategic military minds. Look no further than George Henry Thomas, the Virginian Unionist. Like Meade, he was deliberate and never imperiled the lives of his men unnecessarily. But unlike Meade, he was creative. He was adaptable. He could always shift his strategy in the chaotic and ever-changing circumstances of warfare.
George Thomas, that is strange. I really haven't heard much about this faithless Virginian.
Well, that's because he was modest to a fault. In fact, he probably wouldn't want me to even mention him in this video, because he never wrote a memoir, and he even destroyed his wartime correspondences because he couldn't stand the idea of future generations picking over the events of his life. He also faced a lot of discrimination from his northern superiors because of his southern origins, and he was often overlooked for promotions and acclamations.
Typical.
I'm with you there. And ever since, General Thomas has been kind of forgotten about by historians, despite the fact that he was a huge badass. In a skirmish before the First Battle of Bull Run, he actually went toe-to-toe with Stonewall Jackson and kicked his fucking ass. At the disastrous Battle of Chickamauga, when William Rosecrans, the Union Army commander, fled the field, Thomas remained behind, fighting on alone with his men against the whole Reb army, badly outnumbered and outflanked. And this holding action single-handedly saved the Army of the Cumberland from complete destruction. And 2 months...
That's why I kind of knew the name. I went to Chickamauga in that first battle. The Union had done some things, and they pulled away troops, and the Confederates were charging, and the Union pulled troops away from the middle in a complete and total not reading the battle correctly. Union pulled troops here, and the Confederates sent troops exactly to the center part where the Union had pulled troops away, and they just crushed right through it. I mean, it was a great charge by the Confederacy, and it was also disastrous because the Union pulled reserves away from that area. The Confederacy had the Union on their heels, and the Union was throwing troops all over the place, and this perfect gap opened up, and the Confederates took advantage of it because they were charging it anyways. And the Union fled and ran from Chickamauga back up to I just had it, Chattanooga. And Thomas stayed behind and fought them off so that the Union could retreat. That's how I knew him. I do know George Thomas. And you know what? Now that I'm thinking of it, I believe, I haven't read it, so I do apologize, but I want to say that Ulysses S. Grant in his memoirs said a lot about Joseph E. Johnston. I could be wrong on that, but that just reminded me for some reason. I want to say he said something about Thomas too. Very good about Thomas, but him and Thomas I don't think had a very... They had a working relationship, but they didn't have a friendship / relationship like he had with I'm speaking of Ulysses S. Grant. I apologize. That Grant had with Sherman and that he had with Sheridan. He didn't have that with Thomas, but he trusted him.
Later, United States forces would get their revenge at the Battle of Missionary Ridge, where Thomas and William Tecumseh Sherman orchestrated a frontal attack on the Confederate center that shattered their lines, and those lines, might I add, were entrenched on high ground. And then, in December 1864, Thomas faced off against John Bell Hood, who sucks, by the way, in the Battle of Nashville, and destroyed his army. That's not hyperbole. He literally destroyed it. The Army of the Tennessee was laid low. Its ruin smote upon the mountainside. There would be no more large-scale fighting west of the Appalachians for the remainder of the war. George Thomas never lost a movement or a battle, and may very well have been the best general on either side in the entire conflict.
I don't know enough about... Oh my gosh, he just said the name and I forgot already. Wow. Anyways, the guy he just mentioned, I already forgot his name. Oh. If there's a heaven, big guy, and you're up there, I'm not forgetting your name out of disrespect. Greg Messick, yes. Yes, he told me, in fact, he told me to tell you that you ain't shit, but I'm not going to say that. Yeah, see what happens? I pass it off on someone else. George. Wow. And all I'm thinking of is George Rogers Clark. And he had nothing to do. He was in the Revolutionary War. Founder of Louisville, Kentucky. You're welcome if you didn't know that. And older brother of William Clark from Lewis and Clark fame. You're welcome. And he had nothing to do with the Civil War. Oh, wow. Okay. I need a shot. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start this and then have a shot, because I forgot where I was going with this.
Lord almighty. What else this fella do? Cure cancer?
Though as far as good Union generals go, there's one person that we haven't talked about yet.
Let me guess. Sherman. Do it again, Uncle Billy. Spare me your memes, sir. Besides, we've already done an entire episode about him.
No. No.
Oh, is this going to be Grant?
No. Sherman is but the apprentice. He is the master.
Sir, yours of this date, proposing armistice and appointment of commissioners to settle terms of capitulation is just received. No terms except unconditional unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted, I propose to move
Okay.
Johnny. Hey! Are you alright? We were talking, you just started screaming. Are you alright?
Yes, I'm fine. Just a minor hallucination.
Do you hallucinate often?
No?
Anyway, about Ulysses S. Grant. I mean, he was just a beast. I mean, that's the man who saved the Union.
Oh, so now Grant wasn't a drunk. And
I'm not trying to say anything, but I mean, Lincoln he ran for president from Illinois, from Kentucky. Yes, I moved to Indiana. None of that's important. What is important is Illinois. Grant grew up in Ohio. Not important. None of that's important. Moved to Illinois to work at the Tanner the Tanner Company, to work in the tannery business that his dad and brother owned in Galena, Illinois. Galena, Illinois, fantastic town, by the way. Yep. Both of those gentlemen are from Illinois. By the way, if you are ever in Illinois and you just drive through and you're just like, wow, it's awful flat. Yes, you're right. It is. But Galena, Illinois. So when the glacier went over from south up, it hit Galena, Illinois. Galena has a lot of rocks and stuff like that in the core. And the glacier hit and split and went right around Galena. So if you're ever there, Galena has, I'll say, Illinois mountains. Really deep hills. People's homes on there, Victorian era homes. It's a beautiful place, a tourist attraction. But if you're ever in the area and you're like, hey, I'm in Illinois for a couple days, go to Galena. Go to Galena and walk that center strip of town. It's a tourist attraction. You need an old red hat for your grandmother. God damn it, there's a red hat store. It's a hat store. They got popcorn, beef jerky, place for dogs, adult stores like, cups and then magnets and cussing and stuff like that. Places to eat. It's a great place. This is Galena, Illinois did not sponsor this video, by the way, but I'm just saying, if you are ever there, it is a really nice place. It's just a beautiful spot, and you go there on a nice day, like 70 degrees. It's just a beautiful time. Apologies.
Didn't run up a horrific casualty rate amongst his troops. Forget the lost cause. All currently revisionist history has done to canonize the North and demonize the South.
Well, that depends on what you mean by a drunk. I mean, he definitely abused alcohol, but whether he was a occasional binge drinker or you want some? Or a full-fledged alcoholic, I mean, that's kind of hard to determine. Cheers.
Cheers. Whew. If the Butcher Grant is the best you Yankees have to offer, then I'm afraid you are in a heap of trouble. For there is simply no comparison betwixt the Butcher Grant and old Moss Robert E. Lee. In the words of Jubal Early,
real fast, why does he say, is he saying old boss Robert E. Lee, or is he saying old Moss, M-O-S-S, Robert E. Lee? I'm guessing he's saying old boss, but it's just sounding weird. Anyone know? Guessing.
General Lee to his successful antagonist. He as well compare the Great Pyramid, which rears its majestic proportions in the valley of the Nile, to a pygmy perched atop Mount Atlas.
Nice one, Jubal. Wonderful use of Very specific North African imagery. You really showed that butcher Grant what's what.
You keep calling Grant a butcher. Why is that?
Because his generalship contained no spark of military genius.
I will say this. I think that the butcher part is, it's a terrible label. I understand why. Even Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, called Grant a butcher because of the amount of people that were killed. In a 3-month span, I believe, he had like 60,000 people killed, captured, whatever the, what's the term? Casualties. And yeah, that looks terrible in a 3-month span. And I think Lee had like 47,000 in that same span. Still, it is terrible to say that. But with that said, one of the things that the North had was money and manpower. And sometimes when you have more men, you have to overwhelm continuously. And I know that sounds terrible to say you're sacrificing lives, and I understand that. But sometimes it has to be done. It has to be done. Grant would say that. But if Grant were on the front line, he would be no different. Just like every other person who's been a general has been on the bottom end of the totem pole and had to sacrifice their life for the greater good, and they lived. I don't know why I'm just trying to say that the butcher thing, I understand it, but I would never call Robert E. Lee a butcher. I would never call any of the Southern Confederates butchers, but I think Grant gets it because he won. And because it's just an easier thing to say.
His idea of war was to the last degree rude. No strategy, the mere application of the wing's inertia. He had none of that quick perception of the field of action which decides it by sudden strokes. He had no conception of war beyond the momentum of numbers. Such was the man who marshaled all the material resources of the North to crush the little army and overcome the consummate skill of General Lee.
That's a very common and especially Eastern theater-centric misconception, and it mainly stems from Grant's battles against Lee in 1864, namely the Overland Campaign. And yes, to be fair, the casualties in that campaign were appallingly high on both sides.
And though y'all eventually won, your casualties were higher than ours. We lost approximately 33,000 men killed, wounded, or missing. Y'all lost 55,000 men killed, wounded, or missing.
Well, we were on the offensive during the Overland Campaign, and attackers do tend to take more casualties than defenders, especially since the war was becoming steadily more brutal, as tactics slowly transitioned between Napoleonic-style open field type warfare and kind of proto-World War I, deeply entrenched warfare.
Yeah.
That was not the sort of campaign that Grant was trying to fight, by the way. He actually wanted to maneuver Lee into fighting an old-fashioned open field type of battle, where he could bring his superior numbers to bear more effectively. But it was Lee who decided to entrench, so he could better protect Richmond and Petersburg. It had been something he had been threatening to do for a very long time. But Grant was grimly determined and kept the pressure up until the United States achieved a costly but decisive victory.
But what about the Yankee defeat at Cold Harbor, or the Turkish shoot slaughter at the Battle of the Crater?
Yeah, I mean, those two failed attacks were huge mistakes and resulted in a horrendous and completely unnecessary loss of life. But it's important to understand that those missteps were the exception of Grant's generalship, not the norm. You see, Grant had a truly national view of the conflict. Now, there's no way to say this without coming across at least a little bit cold-blooded, but it's a tragic fact. The carnage of the Overland Campaign was necessary to bring the war to a timely conclusion, which Grant did after less than a year in overall command of the United States forces. Contrast that with his predecessors in the East, like McClellan or Burnside, who racked up significantly higher casualties than Grant did, with significantly less to show for it. Grant and Lincoln had a very specific strategy in Virginia at the end of the war: to grab Lee by the neck and to squeeze and to keep squeezing, never giving him a moment's repose, never allowing him for a second to even think about going on the offensive.
Mr. President, if we are to draw troops from the field, it will prove difficult to suppress the rebellion in the disloyal states. My withdrawal now from the James River would ensure the defeat of Sherman.
General Grant, I have seen your dispatch expressing your unwillingness to break your hold where you are. Neither am I willing. Hold on with a bulldog grip and chew and choke as much as possible.
And as battered as Grant's army was, Lee's had suffered far worse, losing a full half of its combat strength in the overland campaign alone.
Yeah.
And while the United States could always augment its...
That wasn't all death, though. A lot of them were just people who just gave up and went home, because they were kind of seeing... Lee had this mental chess game against a lot of the northern generals, and he was beating them. Grant was the first person who kind of knocked over that chessboard and was like, I don't give a shit about that. I'm not going to stop until you surrender. And I think at first, Lee was kind of like, yeah, that's adorable. That's what they all say. But then he realized he meant it. And Grant kept coming. And eventually, the Robert E. Lee mystique vanished to his own soldiers, who no longer looked at him as a guy who was able to run the North off. You got a guy here who doesn't care. And the fact that he's willing to sacrifice his own people, and I don't say that enjoying to say that, but he's willing to sacrifice his own people, means that if this guy... It's like getting in the ring with a boxer who's punching himself in the face. As Richard Pryor said, he's getting in the ring with Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was punching himself in the face. And Richard Pryor's going, what the hell am I going to do against a guy who was beating his own ass? That was the difference. Grant did not care. No fear of Lee. Based off of what he knew about Lee going back to the Mexican-American War, he had studied him. And so he treated it vastly different. I apologize for all the pauses. I'm going to go ahead and kind of let his thing play out, and then I'm going to end this video in like 20 seconds or whatever, and then we'll kick in with the last one.
Forces with fresh troops, the Confederate States were running out of options. As Grant himself reflected,
The rebels have now in their ranks their last man. The little boys and old men are guarding prisoners, guarding railroad bridges, and forming a good number of their garrisons for entrenched positions. A man lost by them cannot be replaced. They have robbed the cradle and the grave equally to get their present force. Besides what they lose in frequent battles and skirmishes, they are now losing from desertions and other causes at least one regiment per day.
Sounds an awful lot like what I was just saying about overwhelming us with numbers.
Lee wasn't overwhelmed. He was outgeneraled. The Union had learned from experience that superior numbers and resources don't win wars on their own. So what they needed was a general who could effectively utilize those numbers and resources, which is exactly what Grant did. He pinned the Army of Northern Virginia down in Richmond and Petersburg while Sherman ravaged the Deep South and closed Lee's back door. Joe Johnston and P.T. Beauregard, who were at that time defending Georgia and the Carolinas respectively, did all they could to keep that trap from swinging shut, but Lee, meanwhile, just froze. He stayed put, and he allowed himself to be obliterated.
Nonsense. Protecting Richmond and our center of government was essential to our survival as a nation.
Okay, but while Lee was busy defending Virginia to the last, Sherman snuck up behind him and rammed a boot up his ass. It was a losing strategy, and Lee is more culpable than you realize. For what shall it profit a man if he gains Virginia, but loses the whole South?
I'm going to just go ahead and stop it here because I could just keep watching. I'm going to stop it here, and then we'll kick back in with the final part of this video. So, like and subscribe, or when you die, you're going to have to listen to this video, but my commentary on it without this video playing. So you're just going to have to listen to me and just sit there and watch me watching things and then try to guess what it is that I'm watching. It's going to be very irritating. Have a good day. Have a good night.